2020 City Nation Place Global Conference. It's a real pleasure to be welcoming you all as delegates from all corners of the world. We would, of course, prefer to be able to welcome you all in person to London, as we have done for the past 5 years, but everyone's had to learn to adapt this year, and this virtual approach will provide many opportunities for new people to join us, so welcome to everybody. With virtual events, we've learned that you get out as much as you put in, and so I'm going to urge you to make the most of the opportunity today to ask questions of our speakers, which you can do in the live feed just below this broadcast window, to join our roundtable discussions, which we've set up to enable you to meet and chat with fellow delegates, to make new connections through our networking platform, and also to pop by our partner zones, where I know that there's a host of supporting materials and case studies that you might find useful. So we hope you're going to have a very busy day. I hope you've got your out of offices switched on so nobody disturbs you. And you can take this time out of your busy lives to just really focus on learning and being inspired. The other rule of virtual events is to stick to time. So I'm going to be introducing our first speaker. We have unfortunately had a very last minute change of programme. It's with great regret that Fiona de Jong, the head of Australia's Nation Brand, has had to withdraw from speaking this morning. This is news that we received overnight from the other side of the world, so we couldn't inform you earlier, but I'm absolutely delighted that Filipe Torres, the CEO of Bloom Consulting, who's been working with Fiona on the Nation Brand strategy of Australia, is here and is able to present. He's going to be sharing learnings from the process, and do remember that you can ask questions on the live feed, and I will try to ask as many as I can at the end of the session. But for now, welcome, Jose. I'm delighted to hand over to you for our first presentation.
Thank you so much. Indeed, it's a pity that Fiona is not here, but it's the same presentation. So I will go and walk you through, and I will have actually even voice over some of her slides if you like. So now, if Fiona would be here, she would have explained that she came from, leading or to lead the Nation Brand project, and she came from the Australian Olympics committee. Sorry, the slides are a little bit not responsive. Really sorry about this.
There's a couple of technical hiccups so far.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. Okay, I'll go very slowly. So coming back again, just explaining that Fiona de Jong is and was leading the Australian, was in charge of leading the Australian Olympic team going back and forth for different countries. And she was then presented with the Nation Brand project and how to lead the Nation Brand project. So as she would say, she's a very organized person with a specific process, and she would just thought that it would be the same thing as an Olympic initiative. So it would be kind of a find and replace, and then immediately she could just say, okay, let's look at New Zealand and do the same thing that New Zealand does, and I'll do exactly, and I'll just work on it. Unfortunately, even when a great story about this was that Rebecca Smith from New Zealand Story told Fiona, was like, it's not really like that, Fiona. You have to understand that why are you doing this? What is the process, etc. and so forth. So the show and the presentation I have here today is to explain what is the traditional, or the objective of this presentation is to explain what is the process of developing a Nation Brand project, like a step-by-step. This is, of course, I'm not going to cover every step that we have created, but really, we created even and the presentation and a handbook, so that, the idea is to create an unpretentious book that is a blueprint for those who have never done this process or taken this challenge, right? So this is kind of the roadmap to nation branding. And offers kind of the essential checklist with the aim of highlighting the often, I would say, overlooked benchmark in building a nation brand. So this is not really an academic book. It's not a theoretical book. It's a practical book. We actually, and I say it's book, and again, this covers some examples that we've developed together with Australia, and we have some stories about Australia, but it's not just about Australia. So it's our 20-year experience here as well as a Nation Brand consultancy, and the steps that you have to look and not overlook, and most of the times they are overlooked. Okay, As I explained, this is a booklet. So this is a booklet that we have created. You can download this PDF. This is available on an exclusive basis at the City Nation Place Toolbox. This is where you can download this document. I invite you to download this document. It's free. The idea is that you use it. The idea is that you print it, and in a very simple time, in a very simple and through a very simple process, and you can look at those steps. And if you have any questions, by all means, share with us. Again, I'm going to share the examples and some examples. I'm not going to go over the entire steps. You have here the 14 steps to nation branding, and these are the steps that we recommend nations to look before they start. And again, this is geared for the ones that don't have experience with this. So here we go. So I'm just going to stop in some of these steps that I think are important to highlight. The detail of each step is, of course, available in that PDF document that you can download from the City Nation Place Toolbox. But I'm going to go on a deep dive in a couple of slides, or just a highlight on a couple of slides, on a couple of steps, and also share the Australia examples and examples from other countries that we have worked with, or just some highlights. The step one is really important, which is lay the foundation and create the preliminary structure. And this starts with the question about the why are you doing this? Why are you developing a nation brand project? And who is actually creating this initiative? Like, why is a nation developing a nation brand project, right? So who has that mandate, and who should manage this initiative? Who should manage this project? Is it something that is manageable? Is it not? What are the necessary aspects to look into whenever you want to build this? Now, I'm going to share an example of Australia, something I learned on the Australian Nation Brand Project. Yes, consultants do learn things from clients. We are not the know-it-all. And that's actually what's important, is that we gain experience from every project that we're involved. We're not smarter, we just have more experience, right? So here the point is, we learned, and there was an amazing initiative. And one of the things, of course, that we talk, when we talk on the foundation of the structure, is you need, of course, a steering committee, and a steering committee is really important. And Australia has this initiative already well developed, and they created a steering committee from the private sector. Everyone that you see here belong to the steering committee in Australia. And the steering committee is going to be not only helping you as what we call brand architects to develop the nation brand and the institution to take it forward, but it's kind of the backup to the initiative of the nation brand. Now, the sentence you see here is from Australia, which I think is fantastic, which is industry-led, government-enabled approach. And so this is really like about the private sector being on board and supporting this and leading this, and having the government to support this initiative. And this is, you will see further down the line, not in Australia, but in other cases, that whenever you have moments of crisis, the steering committee is going to be very, very important. And the government will also can rely on the private sector on this steering committee. Okay. So the takeaways, for instance, on step one, and don't worry, I won't go into every step. Actually, I have a small anecdote. Actually, the original book was this booklet was 20 Steps for Nation Branding. And Fiona said, you know what? It has to be less. We have to trim this down to 14. So we even trimmed this down to 14. And she said, you know what, I'm not going to present all the 20 steps. And no, or the 14 steps. And no. So we're just doing a deep dive. So don't worry, I'm not going to do this like 14 times, okay? But coming back to the takeaway, so it's really important on the step one, on the foundation, like to ask yourself, why are you doing this? What's the purpose of this initiative? And then on this project on the nation brand, create that advisory board and find the brand architects and name a director to lead this. In this case was Fiona Jong. In other cases, for instance, for the case of Israel, which also we work with, is Joanna Landau. So there's a specific person who leads this, and there's a brand champion. Now, we go into step two, which is also very important. Is okay, so why we're doing this, and it's about understanding perceptions. And nation branding is about perception. It's about how the world sees you. When we did the research and when we were looking into Australia was asking this question about how are we perceived? Do we have a positive perception in the world? How does the world see us? And if you look into the data, the Bloom Consulting data, and using the Bloom Consulting nation brand model, you see that when looking into the benchmark, always Australia was on the top, number one, facing its benchmark, and is always on the top 5 worldwide. But it was always coming number one, facing its competitors or benchmark in terms of perception and in terms of reputation. But when you look into demand, and we do this using our digital demand tool, which is measuring what the world is searching online, you see that Australia was never first. I mean, it was fantastic from a brand perspective and perception, but it was never first in terms of demand, right? So the conclusion we got was, it's the number one country in all 5 dimensions facing its competitors, but never comes first facing other countries when it comes to demand. So we saw that this is an indicator that Australia was not capitalizing on its great reputation and not on top of mind for global citizens, that it's important that they do, because in the end, you see, you have multiple purposes whenever you develop a nation brand, and you have different audiences. And some of the purposes are, you want to attract more people to live in the country, or study in the country, or invest in the country, or visit the country, and so on. So I'm just mentioning a few, but in the end, that's the ultimate result that you get from a positive nation brand. So again, asking the question about how people associate your brand with, assess domestic and international perceptions, and establish the benchmark and understanding of the digital identity. Now, the good news is I'm going to start skipping on some of the steps here. So it's step 3, of course, is about identifying the target markets. And you'll see this in the document, what we mean by this. Also about setting specific objectives. Again, it's about narrowing the scope and not trying to go everywhere and to everyone and worldwide. And I would like to stop here on a very important step, which is the mitigate project risk and strategize a crisis management. Now, throughout the process of when you're building a nation brand project, you have countries, whenever they do this, they tend to overlook potential crisis and potential risks for the brand. And when I say risks for the brand, is not just for the nation brand, but for the nation brand project while you're developing and establishing this. And from a perception point of view, a crisis, and we've seen this in many countries, a crisis, and you have different types of crisis. You have our dear Brexit, you have Snowden NSA problem, or the issue of the Chile crisis, and so on. Countries tend to, and so coming here to other examples, of course, beyond Australia, countries tend to look into crisis as, oh my God, this is it. Our brand is destroyed. Oh, what is going to happen, and things like that. And we always said, actually, on a fantastic webinar with it, that crisis not necessarily change the perception and reputation of the country by that specific crisis, unless it's a very, very prolonged crisis. But what is really important, and from a nation brand perspective, you have to mitigate this. And although your brand may not be affected because people won't remember NSA's scandal or the Chile crisis, no one will remember that anymore. So the brand will be unaltered. And it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult to build a brand, but it's also difficult to destroy a brand, right? A nation brand. But this is an amazing opportunity, because every time you have a risk or a specific crisis, suddenly the issue of nation branding is on the top of the agenda of policymakers. So everyone starts to go like, oh my God, what shall we do? What can we do with a nation brand? Or our nation brand is so affected, and so on. And of course, we as consultants, we always tell to clients, look, don't worry. Normally in 6 months, this will come back to normal. But since you're having that attention domestically, because the stakeholder engagement is a key component in developing a nation brand project, since you're having this specific issue and specific attention, it's a great opportunity to raise the importance about nation branding and to engage them on building a more strategic approach. Okay, so then we go into step 6, and I stop here on the step 6, which is defining the central idea. So defining the central idea and identifying what is the central idea is how you want and how you can be perceived for, right? So the central idea is, what is the emotion you want to generate in these 5 groups of stakeholders and these 5 groups of brand audiences? How do you want to be perceived? Now, this is what we call nation branding, is how do you want to be perceived? This is not a communication strategy. This is not a marketing strategy. Actually, you cannot say what is your central idea. If you communicate what is your central idea, you will destroy it. It will go against you. So it's not a marketing strategy, and you cannot communicate this. This is, what I would say, one of the biggest important points whenever you want to build a nation brand. Now, you cannot build in the sense of manufacturing an emotion. You cannot build an emotion is something you don't manufacture, but you can act and behave in a way that you generate that emotion. And that's where I take you to the, to be on brand and the things that you do, which is the following step, which is step 7, is to be on brand and act on brand. And I'll take it to step 8, which is in specific what we call touch points. So when you look in, okay, so how can I build that emotion? It's a question again, and if I cannot manufacture emotions, I need to behave in a way that I generate emotions, right? So here are the areas, if you like, the 4 areas on where nations have to look into in order to behave in accordance to that central idea, to the desired perception that you want to generate in your brand audience. So these are what we call touch points, and these touch points need to be on brand, and being on brand is aligned with that central idea. So the nation brand institutions, the ones that brand architects that generate this, they are not, the role is not simply to talk about, actually should not be just to talk about the brand, but it's also working as a pusher for policies, a pusher for changes, and making sure that whenever a country develops a policy, it's aligned with that central idea. Now, very, very important that I would like to highlight here, that central idea, there's not just one central idea. I mean, there's many things on how countries can position itself. There's not just a monolithic theme that countries should pursue. They should be different. They should have respect and be aligned with what they are as a nation, right? Now, just as a highlight here, you see the clockwise, and the countries tend to focus too much on the marketing, and the marketing should be the last but not least. The most difficult thing countries will face whenever they develop a nation brand project is with the stakeholder engagement. Actually, stakeholder engagement is the reason why most nation brand strategies fail. Because this, whenever you have a corporate brand or a consumer brand or a private company, you have someone at the top that says, this is it, and this is how we're going to work. When this is a public brand. It's a completely inverse pyramid. So you have a lot of people to engage and to be on brand. This is the reason why you either succeed or you fail, or one of the, but this is the one, and you see here this green dimensions is the level of impact. You see that it's through the actions, activities, and policies and the digital identity that you build that perception. Marketing plays a small role. It's important, but plays a small role. And when we say marketing is not the traditional advertising on the Fifth Avenue, but it's in making sure that third parties are talking about you and talking about the other actions, activities, and policies that are aligned with your central idea. You have the management model, you have the engagement with the stakeholders, of course, everything is there on that document for you to look into. And then I would like to stop in one of my favorite ones, which is don't launch the brand and don't create a logo. In the corporate world, there's this saying that the logo is the cherry on top. Whenever you develop a brand, and then there's a logo that it's a cherry on top. It won't build a perception, but it won't destroy a perception at all. Okay, it's a nice thing, it's an identifier and so on. In nation branding, it's the rotten cherry on top, how we call it. Why? This whole thing, this launching a logo and so on, and many projects we've seen throughout the entire year, over the last 20 years, when nations try, or cities even try to launch it and say that it's a logo, people start to look into that as the brand, and it's not the brand. And there's strong criticism, and that can jeopardize and put at risk the entire initiative of the nation brand. And don't launch it in the sense that this is a perpetual thing. So of course you have to monitor and measure. And then on the 13th step is what we call the nation branding 2.0. So moving into the nation branding 2.0. Nation branding 2.0 is a concept that we have launched, let's put it this way. We have announced in City Nation Place, Costa Rica last year, actually. So it was in September, if I'm not mistaken, but we launched this even before. And the idea behind the Nation Branding 2.0 is about the digital identity. And countries now need to look into, with specific care, on how you build your digital identity, because that's what will build and influence perceptions towards the country. Because what people see in the first results, for whatever reason, if people actually even search for you, what they're going to read is going to tremendously influence their perception towards you. So that is when you move from 1.0 to 2.0. And last but not least is the reflect, assess, and repeat. Nations tend to forget that whenever you launch a nation brand, they think it's launched, it's out there, there's a party, it's out there, and we say, don't do it. This is a perpetual thing. It's an ongoing. So you need to constantly reflect, assess, and repeat this process. It's an ongoing, it's a perpetual thing. It's something that you have to manage on a constant basis. So nations need to pay special attention to this, and they need to look that this is not a one-off event that you launch it and it's gone and it has its life on its own. No. So that's the step 14. And I would like to say, thank you very much. This is not me in Australia, but maybe me when I'm a little bit older in Australia. And also to say that you can find a lot of interesting information on our journal that we just give for free and available for everyone. But the book is in Seed Nation Place Toolbox.
Thank you so much, Jose, for launching our day with some serious thinking about what we mean by place brands. I have one question for you because we should be moving on time-wise, really. You've been talking about nation brands and that process for nation branding. What would be the difference if it was a city brand?
Good point. I would say there's some steps there that may have differences because it's not. You can create policies on a nation, but the policies that you want to take this into a city are a little bit different. Sometimes you cannot change laws if you are in a city, than if you can change laws if you are in a country, for instance, right? So it's very similar. I would say it's very similar, with the exception of some of the steps that are applicable only for cities.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was a great start to the day, and you managed very well on your own at the last minute, so thank you for that.